What's up guys, it's SLOTH here, and today we're making a tier list for items, magical damage items for Season 6, for patch 6.1. I've already done one for physical damage items in the past, not too long ago, so I don't need to go through everything again here, but to make it very simple, you can see on the left side we have our tiers. The tiers are a little bit adjusted. I only have A tier, not A plus and A minus tier, because I think it's just a bit too overwhelming in terms of smaller intricacies that don't make much of a difference for the items especially. S minus, slightly better than A. S, like quite a bit better than A significant degree better than A. S plus, really, really strong, has to be picked up almost every game. And SS, so strong that it will lose you games if you don't pick it up. Towards B, we have slightly worse than average items, or items that are a bit more niche, that are maybe as strong as average on certain characters, but can only be used by a few. C, we have items that are maybe a bit niche and bad, or a little bit worse than B tier items. And D, we have items that are just really bad and almost not usable or completely unusable. And with that, we also have a little bit of an overview of the items on the other side here. And what you can see up here, we have the normal items. And down here, we now have the items that will see changes in the next patch, or in 6.1. And with those, we'll take a little bit more time to discuss why exactly they are where they are right now, and then make a bit of an educated decision based on that. And down here, we also have the new elixir, like at the very bottom here. We will talk about that in the context of mages as well, and that's why we all have all the other potions and stuff here too. And with that, let's get started. First item here is Assassin's Blessing. Now, Assassin's Blessing is one that I've already talked about with the physicals. I put it in A there because it's something that you can't really get around, but it's also not a really useful item other than the fact that it is good in jungle. It's not something you could use in a fight. You will not win trades with Assassin's Blessing and stuff like that. So it's A for assassins or for physicals, but it's B for mages in my opinion, simply because there are so few mages that can even make use of it. It's basically Ao Kuang and anyone you want to somehow shoehorn into the jungle. So yeah, I think it's too niche to really put it higher than B, but for a few gods you obviously need it sometime. Then the next one is Attacker's Blessing. Attacker's Blessing, you can't build in Conquest, and I think that's a good thing because this item is very, very strong in terms of how quickly you can build power and penetration with it. And even with this nerf in the new patch, it is technically changed as well, but I think it's still a very, very strong item and it'll deserve a spot in S tier. There are situations where you may not want to pick it up on certain mages, but generally speaking, yes, this is an item you want in most games. Hunter's Blessing, again, more like Assassin's Blessing. There are a few select mages that make good use of it. Most of them don't, so it's more of a B tier item. Mage's Blessing is pretty much Attacker's Blessing's equivalent in Conquest, and will rise even more with the upcoming season, because we see some changes to Book of Thoth that may make it a little less interesting for some characters, for certain builds. And as such, I think Mage's Blessing is going to be very dominant at the start, and we're going to see what other items actually show up. We have some other item changes that may lead to some other items getting value in other ways. But generally speaking, I think the item that we'll see most on mages in mid lane will be Mage's Blessing. Again, it's not that overwhelming that I would put it in S+, where you just like almost forced to build it, and it's not as broken as an SS item where you would lose if you don't build it, but it's a very, very good item. And that brings us to boots. And boots, even with the new potion, will still have very good value in the next season. The first one here are Shoes of Focus. Shoes of Focus, I think, are very nice. They're very strong overall, and for certain guards, they have a lot of value. What's a bit different from when Shoes of Focus was changed is that there are other options for CDR now. You're not as forced to go into Shoes of Focus. For example, you have Mage's Blessing as an alternative. Chronos Pendant was adjusted a few times and it has a bit more value now. Spear of Desolation is something you can at the moment fit decently into builds. So I think it's not quite as mandatory, but at the same time, boots are still very, very necessary. So I will put this in S-. I could also put it into S here, but the sole reason I don't want to put it into into S is because I think that Shoes of the Magi is the S item right now. Right now, generally the penetration is valued a little bit more, and while I personally am someone who prefers playing with Shoes of Focus, many people right now prefer playing with Shoes of the Magi for the early aggression, and I think as such is definitely an S tier item. You want some form of boots in either situation. We also have the, is it Traveler? Yeah, it's a Traveler. So I keep switching up between Travelers and Talaria, but these ones I think are also interesting for very, very few niche cards. I think they're interesting for Morrigan, for example, but overall are too niche to put them with the other boots. I think they are just B tier material. I think they're nice for some, but they're not nearly as frequently used or as useful as either Shoes of the Magi or Shoes of Focus. And then we have our helmet collection, starting with Celestial Legion Helm. Celestial Legion Helm, in my opinion, is one of the most busted mage items we have at the moment. It's so good when you can somehow fit it into your build. The problem is not every mage can fit it into their build equally well. And it's not as useful, or like equally useful in every single game. But especially on Freya and in dual lane, it's super good, but there's also a lot of other mages that can make a lot of use of this. I would say this is almost close to S+, but we have some other item changes that kind of make me feel like S is more justified. That brings us to Lotus Crown. Now, Lotus Crown is something we have to discuss from a damage perspective here. I think Lotus Crown is a great item for healers, but we are primarily talking about damaging items here. From a damage perspective, it's a lot harder to fit it into your build. The only gods that really make use of it are healing gods, of course, and the only one that you really frequently use it on is maybe Hell, and then you have like Afro and some others that can like fit it in when it comes to non-mages, like Guardians. They can make use of it as well, of course. And for them, it's, in my opinion, better. But if we're looking at damage mages, I would say it's a B tier item. It really depends on who you're looking at here. It's still not bad at all, but it's just too niche to put it higher. Demonic Grip, hard to say, because technically it's a niche item. But at the same time, it's an incredibly strong niche item. If you're going for an attack speed build, you do not want to skip out on Demonic Grip as a mage. It's definitely one of the items that is very high up there. And that makes it hard for me to place it, because it's like, it's technically S, but then it's also B. I will just put it into S- with the explanation that I've given you here. You know that Demonic Grip is extremely good for a basic attacking mage, and protection reduction right now is pretty crazy in general. So if your mage makes a lot of use of basic attacks, if it's a Freya or a Sol or a Chronos, then Demonic Grip is fantastic. But it has to be one of those gods. There's some other gods where you can kind of force it in, maybe like a Poseidon, for example, but you don't want to have it in a god that doesn't use basic attacks, so that's why it's not quite god tier for all mages, basically. Voidstone is another one of those where if we were talking about tanks, about defensive choices, and I will talk about this item in the defensive segment again, I think, then it's one of the best items. Then it's like an S+ kind of item. Maybe not S+, but definitely an S item. But we're talking about mages, and we're talking about damaging mages. And when your primary goal is damage, then it's harder. Most of the time you have other options for pen or for protection reduction, and for survivability, it's still nice, but it's not like the most important item choice for you overall. I'm kind of tempted to put it into B because it's a niche item. At the same time, I see that it has a lot more uses than the other items in B here. You can still fit it on a mage when it's needed. So I'm actually a bit conflicted on this one. I think I will put it into A. Again, with the disclaimer of what I just said here, of this being a potential better item on some gods and worse on others. Maybe I'll just put it at the bottom of A here, not in the sense of A-, but just to reflect that it's not like a normal A item, but more of a conditional A item. And then we have Jade Emperor's Crown. Again, if this was from a defensive perspective, then this would be fantastic. But from a damaging mage perspective, it really isn't exactly what you want. And I think it's less so even than Jade Emperor's crown is. Sorry, Lotus Crown is. I'm confusing the names of the crowns all the time. So I think this is, for a damaging mage, is a C tier item. I really don't see much of a reason to pick this up. Not even in like a bruiser type build most of the time. Whereas, again, for tankier gods, it's a lot better. And that brings us to the last item where we have this issue, basically, or one of the last items. And that is Toxic Blade. And Toxic Blade, I think, it's not good. It's just, it's very much at the bottom in terms of value, because it doesn't bring any significant performance or anything that would warrant putting it high. So I think I'll just put it down to C as well here. Super niche, maybe for some basic attacking gods, but almost never usable. Yeah, that's about it. Divine Ruin, on the other hand, is one of the best mage items, hands down. It's so good that if it wasn't situational for anti-heal, it would be S+. But if there's any need for anti-heal on the enemy team at all, then there's no harm in picking this up. It gives you all the stats you want for a relatively cheap price. There's nothing more to say. There's just, you can always fit this in. Even if this item didn't have anti-heal, it would still be an okay-ish item. You wouldn't build it probably, but like, if there weren't the same other pen options that we have right now, it would still be good. So yes, build this whenever you can fit it in and it's useful at all, even if it's just against heavy lifesteal. Pythagram's Piece. Pythagram's Piece is this item that right now, and especially from the perspective of a damaging mage, I want to put in B, because you barely ever are able to fit it in, but at the same time, the stats are insanely good. Like in terms of stat value, I think it's probably still to this point one of the best items in the game. You might have some more competition now with some other buffs like Blackthorn Hammer and stuff, but it's definitely up there. So I will do the same thing I did with Voidstone here. I will put it into A, and again say this is kind of very conditional. And the problem with this item is that while it's super good, it's super hard to actually fit it into any build. The stats are technically there, and it's technically very helpful for your whole team, but who builds it? Actually, you know what? I will put it into B. I will put it into B. If we had more gods that could build it, it would be an A item. But I think it's just, yeah. Like Voidstone, you can fit in a build. This piece, hardly ever. And then, because we're already in B, we also have Nomicon. Fun item, nice damage increase, useful for a very select set of characters, but not something you would generally use on most mages most of the time. Like, it's core on a few mages, specifically the Morrigan, but then a few others can also make very, very good use of it. And for those who are strong, for the rest, there's often better options. And one of those is Soul Gem. And Soul Gem is going to fit in A, because Soul Gem does similar things to Polynomicon, with some other perks in different variations, but it's also a lot safer. You can use it a lot more effectively without putting yourself at risk. And CDR obviously helps as well for certain guards that can make better use of this combination. So that's very nice. And then we have Spear of the Magus, which is not an A item. Like pretty much all pen items, it's very, very good. And I think Spear of the Magus is an item that, with the frequency it's being picked up at the moment, deserves S. And I still think that Spear of the Magus needs nerfs. I could almost go for S+ here. I think the penetration that it offers is very good. It's very useful for a lot of mages. It's just not quite every mage that can make use of it, so maybe not quite S+. And we have Stone of Fall, and Stone of Fall is an item that's actually depressing. It's such an interesting idea, but it's not really working. The damage reduction after being hit by a burst ability that deals a certain amount of your max HP as damage means just like, yeah, you pick it up against Herbois. But even then, it only really matters when it's a combo. It's so awkward. I think the passive needs another rework. I think it's just not something that you can logically and reasonably fit into most builds. And I think it's a C tier item bordering at D tier right now. Like, it wouldn't take much for it to go down to D tier. And I think it needs some sort of buff to make anything out of it, really. which is sad. And then we have Hastened Ring. Hastened Ring, I think, is also more of a niche item. AA mages make good use of it, and on Freya, I think it's still pretty much core. On the other ones, I don't know. There's not that many guards that really make that great use of Hastened Ring, and even on AA guards, there's a lot of items that I would consider before I build this, because, you know, you get more out of power out of burst and just hope that your allies have the lockdown. It's too situational for A, in my opinion, though still a very good item. An item that is just straight up A for me is Shaman's Ring. Very good on some guards, decent enough on others. Not so good on some guards. Just very, very balanced overall. You have to see where you can fit it in. You probably won't build it nearly as often as Soul Gem, but it's also just, it's rarely ever wrong to build it. So that is what, in my opinion, makes it A, even though you don't see it that much. Bancrofts. I think Bancrofts will actually rise in popularity and relevance, and I will put it into S-. Bancrofts always has this competition basically going on with Book of Thoth, but right now, for the first time in a while, we may see some shifts in terms of how items behave and what is valued more. And I think Book of Thoth will lose some value and Bancrofts will gain some in return. Ethereal Staff, interesting item, interesting passive, hard to say. As a damaging item choice, I think you can sometimes kind of fit it in late game when you need the extra survivability, and then it can be useful for that to some degree, but it's not, again, a typical damage mage item, and as such, I will put it right here with Voidstone. Like, it's not a bad item, and it does damage in a way, and it's nice for tankier mages especially, but it's also not a standard mage item in that sense. War of Asclepius, such a nice item in theory, but it's just not really working, and I think the problem is that anti-heal is just too dominant right now, and if you're like going into support if items, then you're better off getting Lotus Crown especially. But even other cooldown focused items and then just tankier items will typically help you more. And for a damaging mage, most of the time, you won't get much out of it. It's just too circumstantial at this point, in my opinion. Spear of Desolation. I think that is a classic A-tier item, though I think it has a lot of potential to go up. Maybe it's even S-. It's been used a lot more lately. I know that Pretty Prime, for example, has been running it a lot. And... No, actually, with the look at Season 6 here, I will make a prediction. I will say there will be S-, which may very well be wrong at the end of the day, but I think the combination of power and pen will allow this item to shine a bit more with other options being less viable. Book of the Dead. Cool concept. Hard to say what it will do now. It might be valued more because of Book of Thoth, or it might be valued less if Book of Thoth isn't picked up. I'd say it's around A tier-ish. It's a nice survivability item with a nice amount of damage as well. So I think that's a nice combination overall. And even without Book of Thoth, it would still be okay-ish. So yeah, an A item. Though more of a less popular looking, especially at Soul Gem. Warlock Staff. Really good for some, but overall a bit too situational. Again, we could see a shift of balance here, and we could see it rise again due to Book of Thoth dropping down, but I find that a bit too early to say. So I will say for now, Warlock Staff is a B tier item, and then we'll see how it goes, really. Gem of Isolation, on the other hand, is an A item. It is a bit situational, yes, but it can be very, very nice. It is no longer this niche item of just slowing the enemy but it also has a decent amount of power now. It's good, a good mix of everything, really, and I think that makes it an A item now. And we know, for example, that Merlin will very likely make very good use of it as well, so we have a new character that will, for who it would be above A as well. So, yeah, it's really core on some characters, and that makes it so interesting. Like, it's hard to build some characters without it. For example, Poseidon is one of those where you can build around it, but do you really want to do that? And then we have Telekines. Telekines, I think, is in the middle of the pack. It's not quite as valuable as Demonic Grip in most situations, but it is very nice for AA mages for the overall damage output increase. And with the right build and everything, it can do a lot of work for you. So yeah, I think a solid item overall. And speaking of solid items, I think Chronos Pendant is also a solid item right now. I think it has found its place where you can build it on some, but it's not the most popular item for most, and that puts it here. Rod of Tahuti. Hard to say. Rod of Tahuti might actually make a bit of a return because it's an easy way to get a lot of power now. I would have put it in B prior to Season 6, but I think Rod of Tahuti may actually gain some value on certain characters now, especially those that have like this benefit from having low HP targets. Like the one that always comes to mind, of course, is Zeus here, where the target goes under 50% and then you drop the detonate on them and you do more damage with it. So I think Rod of Tahuti might actually make a bit of a return. Again, a little bit of a guess into the future here. Now we have the two masks, and the masks are always a bit awkward. The Ragnar's mask, we have to keep in mind that only very few characters that look for magical damage can build it, and that's just Guardians basically that go into damage builds. So it's already more of an outlier. So I will just put it in C tier here because really most mages can't even use it, and those who can will probably very rarely use it. And usually it's actually maybe in D tier even. I'm trying to think of magical damage dealers or guardians that can function as magical damage dealers that can really make effective use of it. And I don't really see much potential for them. I see a lot of potential in the physical department. Of course, I've talked about this in a past video, but I think for magicals, thinking of like maybe you have those builds. They have maybe I'm gonna put it in C just in case somebody finds a super crazy build where it can somehow be viable. Like, who knows? Maybe we'll suddenly have Rangdas Xingtian all over the place or Rangdas Sylvanas, but very unlikely. Bottom C tier. Bumba's Mask is a little bit more useful here, I would say. It's a little bit more situational, and I will put it into B because I think Rangdas Mask is, for Morrigan especially, it's very good, and there's some other mages that can make better use of it than physical damage dealers can do in general, especially due to the CDR on the item. And that brings us to the items that receive changes. I'm actually going to pop those up on the side here so I can look at them at the same time. The first one being a Doom Orb. Now, Doom Orb now has a tier 2 Cursed Orb, which has somewhat similar stats to the old Doom Orb. 1,600 gold, slightly lower stats, and more of a bridge item. And the interesting thing with Doom Orb is it gets a lot of power towards the end, but it's also very expensive. So what I'm guessing will happen is that people will build the tier 2 of Doom Orb early in the game, for the passive especially, for the movement speed increase, and then upgrade it late game, because some things are not upgraded the same. Like the movement speed doesn't increase when you upgrade Doom Orb from Cursed Orb. You get 1% movement speed per target or per kill on Cursed Orb, but you also get 1% on Doom Orb, whereas the power that you get extra doubles and the power on the item increases drastically. So yeah, overall I think Doom Orb in itself is maybe not as interesting as Cursed Orb just yet, but it's very hard to judge where this item will go. I could put it in like a question mark section basically, and that would be justifiable. I will put it in A. I think there's gonna be uses for it. I think it's gonna be good for certain guards that can make use of the passive of Cursed Orb. And if we go into a rotation heavy meta, then it can easily go above A. If movement speed is what we will need on mages to rotate around. But at the same time, it's not going to replace boots, for example. It's it's not going to be rushed in early game with that price tag it has. So yeah, it's going to be interesting how it develops. I think it's a solid item now. Book of Thoth, also one of those that received a change. The change here is quite complex, basically. It revolves around decreasing the immediate power you get from your base mana and shifting it over to power you get from additional mana items. So you no longer get any power from the mana that you have as a character, but you get power from items, from mana from items. The scaling is adjusted, so it's not like the item is completely trashed through that, but I'm not sure how valuable it will be. I will also put this into A, whereas previously I would have put this into S. I think Book of Thoth has to be, like Hyres wants it to be, a very conscious decision now. So you really have to say, I want to build into mana. I want to heavily invest into mana in my build to a degree that I can get enough usefulness out of this item, and I have to commit to stacking for it as well. Maybe players won't be willing to do that. Maybe it will go down to B. It's hard to say at this point without much testing, but I do think that it'll still have some value for some, because there isn't that much harm in mana stacking on quite a few mages as well, and in the combination with Book of the Dead, for example, it's still a nice item overall. And the next one is Soul Reaver. Excuse me. And Soul Reaver is going to be one that I put in S-. Now, Soul Reaver is receiving a nerf, where the bonus effect, the bonus damage will only do 50% of the initial effect on the second hit, and on following hits, unless you don't hit a target for 3 seconds with abilities. So it's gonna lose some burst potential for mages with a lot of quick abilities, basically. And that, I think, is completely fair. But I think it's still going to be very strong. It still has a good price tag for the power and everything it has. So I think it's going to be a solid choice still, and maybe even be a bit more popular through Book of Thoth going down a little bit in popularity. The next one here is Typhoons Fang. Typhoons Fang got a 5% lifesteal increase, and I toyed around with it a little bit to see how much we can get out of it. But honestly, I think it'll remain a niche item. I don't really see it going up drastically in popularity all of a sudden. Unfortunately, I'm running out of space here, but I think it's going to be a B tier item. I'm going to squeeze it here. I could, argue for it being C tier as well. I don't think it's A tier. I don't think it's close to Bancrofts either. Maybe if Bancrofts gets like really popular, people might try to combo that with Typhoons Fang, because those give you like the biggest power spike combined. But I find that A, too early to say, and B, I think it's too unfitting for many mages. Too many mages don't really want to invest into lifesteal that heavily for that to be really useful, and would rather have the other passives or item that we have around here. So I think it's still gonna be niche. Obsidian Shard is super good. It's getting a change, price and damage increase, and that may actually buff it. I'm almost tempted to put it into S+, because so many mages use it, but then there are some that would rather have Demonic Grip when they have access to it, and they can make use of it, so almost S+. It's hardly any games where you will not be able to use it, at least, and it's even good combined with Spear of the Magus. So yeah, good item. And now for Stone of Binding. Now, Stone of Binding, again, I'll make this simple. I think Stone of Binding is not really a damaging mage item, and more of a tank bruiser solo laner item. So if your goal is damage, I don't think you will be picking up Stone of Binding even after this. Even though it can be nice to have these early protections. But for solo laners, on the other hand, I think it has quite a bit of value now. And they typically have more CC anyways. So yeah, right here in A tier with the others that don't really fit on mages that well, but are good items in other logic. And then we have a very interesting one, a Dynasty Plate Helm, which gets a power increase from 45 to 55. Dynasty Plate Helm once upon a time used to be super, super strong. Used to be valued to the point where it was really picked in almost every game because it countered the jungler so well if you were playing mid. And it's kind of cheap as well, which is nice. At this point, it's fallen out of favor, and it's mainly due to this friend up here. And that begs the question how much of a difference this change will make now, because if you're trying to survive a physical, then are you really going to invest into Dynasty at this point when Celestial Legion is a thing? And I'm not sure about that yet. I think if it turns out that the value overall is higher, and it is logical that you would go into the more cheap item, then yes, it will be picked up. And maybe for mid-mages it's just a bit more accessible in early games, so maybe in that sense it has a benefit. Maybe it also depends on the matchup. Maybe if the enemy has like a lot of heavy physical burst, then you'd rather go into Celestial, and if it's more a decent amount of damage, but the stacks, for example, wouldn't help you that much against it, then maybe it's Dynasty. Maybe like against AA guards, you're more likely to go Dynasty, and against burst guards, you're more likely to go into Celestial. We have to find out about that and see how it goes, really. And now we have our new Elixir of Speed. I actually want to go through the other ones first here, because we have our Potion of Magical Might, and I think at the point where you can afford it, it's a very strong item, and you should probably look to get it before you, for example, upgrade your relics quite often, especially if you don't have full CDR yet. This is a nice little benefit for 500 gold. So that one I think is very, very nice. And I even think the 3k pot is, in a sense, a good item, like an A tier item, right? Like at the point where you can afford it. And with those out of the way, like I guess in late game, if you ever get to that point, it's technically it's SS, because then you want to build it, because there's no reason not to if you have enough gold for it, but most of the time you don't get there. Now, the problem with this elixir is something that Emilzy has very well illustrated in a recent video, where he talks about how the stats of this item actually are. And what you technically would want to do, of course, is get this in your 6th slot, like as a 6th slot item. The problem is that in many situations, you will not actually get that much out of it. You have to sell your boots, you have to spend 2,000 gold on this, and then you also have to buy the other item that you want to buy. So you're making a lot of losses here, to the point where you can basically buy a 3k pot at that point. And I guess if you were going to a defensive pot, then you could consider instead going into like a Mantle of Discord. That would make a lot of sense. But for the offensive red pot, the 3k pot, it's so much damage that you're getting through that is very hard to get through a single item. If you're after a specific passive, then yes, I can see it being useful. But in its current version, I don't think it's really worth it. What I would propose for this item is to make it different. Right now it's 2,000 gold, and you still have to sell your boots, and you get the extra slot that way. What I propose is that you cannot buy this before you bought boots, or Acorn in Tosca's case, which would prevent like this from being abused in early game. But then the item itself has a relatively low price tag, say like 500 gold. That way, you would still spend 500 gold above what you spend for boots, and you would be able to get your potion that way. Or maybe even better, maybe just make it the sales value of boots. You would still end up with a loss overall. You would still end up spending gold on it. You would still end up losing stats for it. You would lose the power or the pen or whatever you get from your boots. But you would be able to get the movement speeds out of them, and you wouldn't have to spend any extra gold to get your next item. I think that would be a nice path. Maybe not 500. When I think about it, 500, then you'd basically get a profit out of selling boots that you could invest into another power item. Maybe just make it the exact sales value of boots, but only once you have sold your boots. My take on this, really. I think this would be making this a lot more interesting. But yeah, right now I think it's not really worth it. I think it's like down here, whatever. Because it makes no sense to buy it before a 500 gold pot, and it makes little sense to buy it before a 3k pot. And the investment that results out of it is very high and often unjustifiable. And like I said, SS is for items that you should buy every game, because if you don't buy them, you'll probably lose the game. You guessed it, much like with physicals, that's your wards. Especially if you're playing middle lane, you should definitely put wards on both sides of the jungle, and not let your jungler do that for you, because you will be the one who's getting ganked. And if you want to have ganks yourself from your jungler, then they will definitely gank more of your wards as well. And that's it for this item tier list. Let me know if you guys enjoyed it by leaving a like. And also, I will make another one of these for defensive items, for tank items. And maybe I will, at a later point, overhaul the one for physical damage for Season 6 as well. Because as unfortunate as it is, because I just recently made it, I think quite a few things have changed, so we'll see if I do that too. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, feel free to smash that subscribe button. And other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.